Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. Welcome to the April Sustainable Cities and Landscape webinar. This is the part 2 series of the bottom-up resilience challenges for the marginalized public under COVID-19, which is co-organized by April SCL Hub and the Pacific Rim Community Design Network. And let me share the introductory. So, sorry, let me go back. This webinar is the part 2 of a series, as I mentioned, and it's being organized by a unique partnership between APRU, Association of Pacific Rim Universities, and APRU SCL Hub, and Pacific Rim Community Design Network. APRU, the Association of Pacific Rim Universities, is a network of over 50 leading research universities in the Pacific Rim region. The association was set up in 1997, and the secretariat is based in Hong Kong. For more details about APRU, please visit the official website. To be more specific, the APRU Sustainable Cities and Landscape Research Program was set up 4 years ago in response to increasing concerns about the sustainability of cities due to rapid urbanization and population growth worldwide. Through the program, the hub aimed to address local city landscape issues associated with global challenges by engaging with partners from academia, urban policymakers, and local stakeholders. The Pacific Rim Community Design Network currently has more than 300 members, including academics, professionals, community design professionals, and community workers from the Pacific Rim region. It was launched following a conference organized at University of California, Berkeley in 1998, around the same time when APRU was founded. Through conferences and joint projects, the network has provided a vehicle for collaboration and mutual support, as well as a forum for comparative understanding of community design in the fast-changing political and social context of the Pacific Rim. And it's truly my honor to be the moderator of the webinar today, titled Bottom-Up Resilience, through which we would like to bring your attention to the agencies of local communities around the world, especially the marginalized, the privileged communities. And we will have speakers from Hong Kong, Taipei, Tokyo, and Geoffrey Howe from University of Washington will be our discussant today. And Liz Mali from Tohoku University. She is also the co-host of the webinar today. She will specifically facilitating the Q&A session. And a little bit of housekeeping, how are we going about the webinars? We encourage every participant to raise questions via the Q&A function during presentations. And please share the webinar info and at 1997, and hashtag April Plus on Facebook and Twitter about your learning of the webinar. For more details, please visit the webpage. Soon we will be starting with a series of short presentation from our speaker. Each speaker will share in 5 minutes about his or her experiences working with the communities. And then we will have a discussion session, and our discussor, Geoffrey Howe, will join us. The last session, the Q&A session, we will have Liz Molly collecting and selecting, synthesizing the questions, and then we will invite every presenters to address questions as much as possible. So we will now moving on to the presentation. The first group of speakers is they are from Hong Kong. Cecilia Chu, associate professor at University of Hong Kong, at Marta Ilaso, who is an architect and urban designer, and she's also teaching at the University of Hong Kong. So Cecilia and Marta, you may share your screen now.
Shall I start, Shumei?
Yes, please.
Thanks very much, first of all, Shumei and Jeff, for organizing this amazing panel. I'm Cecilia from HKU. I actually attended yesterday's panel and found the discussions extremely useful in helping us to contextualize the different stories that we have heard, including our own case, which is on the self-help initiatives of Hong Kong's foreign domestic workers during the COVID-19 crisis. For me, on my part, I'll briefly introduce our project before passing to Marta for the presentation. Our talk is based on a larger study of Hong Kong's domestic workers and the idea of commoning, which refers to the potentials for creating new values through the sharing of resources. In that project, we look into the different ways in which domestic workers, mainly those from the Philippines and Indonesia, organizing their weekly leisure activities by building up various resource networks that allow them to enrich their collective social lives as well as to improve their future prospects. We are particularly interested in understanding the intricate relationship between the self-help practices of the workers and the different institutions that support them through various programs with specific purposes, including the unions, the consulates, the banks, and other commercial enterprises. By doing so, we also want to understand more about the individual motivations of domestic workers and how mutual help has shaped their collective aspirations as a marginalized group in a city where they remain as outsiders. So now I'll pass on to Marta for explaining the slides.
Thanks, Cecilia. Hello, everyone. I'm Marta Catalan. Self-help initiatives were put to practice to deal with the various difficulties. Foreign domestic workers, a largely female group of around 400,000 individuals, were not included in the almost 300 billion government fund to assist the affected industries and the public in Hong Kong. Fears of contagion meant that employers were largely unwilling to give domestic workers their weekly day off, and the numbers show that 29% of the community, that is 116,000 workers, had their days off reduced. Also, domestic workers did not receive basic protection against COVID by their own employers. Between 11 to 14% of the community, that is 43,000 to 55,000 workers, did not have access to these products at their workplace. However, during these months of the pandemic, many grassroots organizations and unions from the community of domestic workers have been especially active to provide this needed extra support. First, these groups reached out to the community and gave away masks and other first necessity products donated by companies. They also provided moral, legal, and health support to those in need. And second, there was an upsurge in the amount of online activities to educate the community and publicly discuss issues of labor and migration in regards to COVID-19. The virtual space took over a much stronger presence and play a key role in triggering global opportunities for these communities' resilience in the region and around the world. The Indonesian Migrant Workers Union, IMU, had an online meeting with Indonesian President Joko Widodo, you see in the image on the left, to discuss these issues. And at a global level, the first ever global online rally of migrant domestic workers took place, with more than 500 participants representing 100 organizations from 39 countries. It was a collective demand of migrant domestic workers and their advocates for inclusion, services, protection, and rights. Some of these events brought to the forefront large issues of inclusivity and aimed to bring awareness to the relevance of these self-help initiatives. Usually festive events, such as the celebration of Women's Day, turn into an opportunity to reach out to the community and provide collective support. The poster on the left, let's fight for the health, safety, and security of migrant workers in the midst of coronavirus by being concerned and organized. However, individuals in the community with no affiliation to any particular group also played a key role in these self-help initiatives, sharing masks or sanitizers, emotional support, or assistance for those sacked or willing to return to their homeland under the lockdown for an individual basis. To conclude, these self-help practices are also a product of this community being neglected in Hong Kong civic discussions. So it is important to understand how these activities interact with the institutional and unveil the intricate relationship between individuals, groups, and institutions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Marta and Cecilia. That was wonderful, and I also found it interesting to see there's a correspondence between migrant workers from Taiwan, between Taiwan and Hong Kong. Let's move on to the second presentation. We have Michelle Su Wang from Impact Hong Kong. Michelle has been involved in community organizing for a decade. She has joined Impact Hong Kong after completing a Master of Professional Studies in Labor and Global Workers' Rights from Pennsylvania State University since 2018. So you may share your slides.
Thank you for inviting me, because it's such a privilege to talk here. And also I just saw a lot of familiar faces, because I used to be an organizer of domestic workers. Right now I'm working in Impact HK. It's a homeless charity in Hong Kong who we embrace kindness and also embrace a community to help out to the homeless. So just want to have a little update about the homeless situation in Hong Kong, because it can be quite complicated in Hong Kong. Like different people, if they are facing different situation and end up they can be homeless. But most of the homeless we reach out to, we know that they have social isolation, because they literally lost their family, they lost their touch to the other kind of people, friends, and end up they being on the streets. They do not have any like social security system to help them through the difficult time in their life. And also we saw that a lot of people are jobless. They usually were unemployed, and then they use up most of their saving, and end up they need to find some day job or temporary job that cannot provide them any security in their life. And also we find that within this marginalized group, a lot of them have a huge amount of pressure that's affecting their physical health and also their mental health. And also drug addiction is quite common found among people who is lack of connection. Impact Hong Kong, we are a charity based on community. So we believe that through our community within our organization, we link up the homeless and also volunteer and our donor and also our workers. We can provide them a sense of community and let them include in the social in the society again. So we embrace kindness and respect throughout our service. So during the COVID-19 this difficult time, we find that there's a group of refugee and also net cafe refugee. They can't really find any place to stay when people are quarantined in their home, but they have no place to stay. So they want to stay in McDonald's, but even in March, McDonald's were closed for a month. To prevent the COVID, this makes the homeless situation much more difficult. We find our situation as a charity, like the other NGO in Hong Kong. We react quickly on this situation. We have before COVID, we also have a food distribution program, but during the COVID, before COVID, we are serving like 30 people a day. But after COVID, we are right now serving 150 people. We find out that the community need extreme support to maintain their daily life. And then we launch crowdfunding, which provide us huge support to provide housing, provide shelter for the homeless immediately. Our co-workers start the initiative, but then we find out that the volunteers are so willing to take the ball rolling. We have a group of very dedicated volunteers helping us to reach out to the homeless. They go to park, they go to public area to find the homeless and then reach out to them and let them know that we provide housing. And after a month, we successfully provide for almost 200 homeless for a shelter. And in our day-to-day service, we also send out masks and also hand sanitizer. But we find out that a lot of homeless do not really care about like wearing a mask or prevent the COVID, rather than their health situation. They rather find a place to stay or deal with their like immediate kind of survival. That's why we distribute the food, and also we have a emergency aid project with MSF to educate them about their health and the reaction to the COVID, what they can do to protect themselves. So we find out that the charity is actually a relocation of resources, and we find out that we hope that as an organization, we provide the community to as a social safety net that our government failed to provide. I think we can talk about more in our discussion section. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. That was impressive. And now it's my turn, myself. I'm Shumei Huang, again from National Taiwan University, and I'm going to share what's been happening in my city, the city of Taipei. Okay. Compared to my academic friends across borders, I have been more fortunate to be able to live and work, as usual, most of the time in Taipei. We did experience significant changes and limits during February and March, a little bit of April, but the universities here are never shut down. And I have been able to send my daughter to the nursery, so I'm able to join you here now. In May and June, my students and I have been able to continue our community-based planning studios and resume carrying out workshops in the neighborhood. Thanks to the allegedly support Taiwan government. Certainly, I'm not here to talk about how great our government is, but to begin with this, my reflection with this idea of the national team, which has been highlighted in international media. And as you can see, the numbers, already in mid-May, we were witnessing 0 new cases for more than a week and continuing until now. So in Taiwan, the situation is a little bit awkward and unreal because we know the overall situation around the world is worsening. But in Taiwan, we've been able to work and live as usual. Here I want to talk about this idea that I learned from the communities in Wanhua, a district in Taipei and known in Taiwanese Hokkien as Manga. It's where the poor and elderly concentrated in the cities. And because of these population characteristics, there has been more than 20 community-based or social work organizations concentrating in Wanhua. And I would like to bring your attention to their effort, how they managed to try to sustain their work even during the crisis. So they came up with this idea of the community team can help too, sort of in response to the government campaign, #Taiwan can help. And especially I would like to highlight this initiative, Grassroots Empowerment Market. Since 2016, some 20 community organizations has been banded together to organize this market to reach out and advocate for their agendas. And it's being organized every season, yet it has to be canceled due to the pandemic. So the community workers decided to continue it online in early May, and this is what they were trying to do at that time, trying to like continue this kind of circulation, sharing economy, secondhand market online. And I learned that one of the best sellers is from a restaurant, a small restaurant run by Vietnamese women immigrants during that time. Some more community activities were able to resume since late May. And I talked to some of them. It's interesting to hear them talking about after experiences this crisis and the limits, they realize that this is what we really want to do despite the pandemic. So we will, we feel more like grounded and have more willingness to meet no matter how difficult it is. For example, this is one of the organizations based in Wanhua Tangbu community, and they are currently organizing to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the community organization in their neighborhood. In contrast, then I would like to bring your attention to the migrant workers in Taiwan, and we have about 700,000 of them, and most of them are from Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Fortunately, we don't have outbreak in the migrant worker dorms like Singapore that Ben Kang talked about yesterday. And migrant workers in Taiwan actually they also are titled to the mask rationing program provided by the government as long as they have that health insurance card. Compared to Hong Kong, mask distribution is not as much a problem here. And interestingly, I also learned from people who work with them, sharing their experiences that actually they haven't seen much changes from their already being semi-quarantine lifestyles in Taipei as migrant workers, because most of the time, due to the immigration policy and the living program regulations, they have been experienced social isolation and spatial concentration most of the time, even before the crisis. So this is a quote from Yuwen Wang, who is a community worker and who is also a teacher working for carrying out Mandarin class for the migrant workers. Quote, they are actually better than anyone to live in isolation, to maintain online, real-time, fragmented social interaction. Still, challenges and inequality exist. For example, despite all that resources I mentioned provided by the government, but migrant workers are largely seen as laborers rather than full human beings in the society. So this conceptualization actually significantly shape the kind of information that's available and provided to them. Plenty information in diverse languages about self-health management, rather than, for example, laborize issue during the pandemic. And in the name of safety, in the name of security, of course, we learn lots of stories about suspensions of holidays and social activities, which deprive their right to the city. And for years, the kind of Mandarin classes that Yuwen was part of have been seen as a kind of legitimate leisure activities by the employers. They support them to go to the classes. But if this kind of Mandarin classes were suspended due to the pandemic, then they were deprived their right to participating in social activities. So to sum up, I think we need to pay more attention to the social isolation and spatial concentration that is already existing in the city. Which is, however, invisible, neglected by the majority before the pandemic. And I think understanding of such is critical to enhancing bottom-up resilience during the pandemic crisis and beyond the crisis. Thank you very much. Okay, so sorry, I'm trying to be a presenter, ending my presentation, and now move on to the next speakers. We will have now Kasai and Masato Dohi. They are from Advocacy and Research Center for Homelessness Arch. Now Kasai is also a research fellow at the University of Tokyo. And Dohi Sensei is an associate professor at Tokyo Institute of Technology. Now we'll do the presentation, and you may now share your slides.
Okay, thanks Shumei for introducing us. Hi everyone, I'm Nao. Masato and I are co-founders of a Tokyo-based organization called Arch. Today I will mainly introduce our activities before and during the pandemic. So ARCH stands for Advocacy and Research Center for Homelessness. It's established in 2015 and we aim to make Tokyo an inclusive city for all. We are not service providers for homeless people, but try to organize citizens for a transformative change. This is our primary project, Tokyo Street Count. We started this project 5 years ago, and the background was that the Tokyo Metropolitan Government conducts their rust sweepers counts during the day and ignores the actual size of the problem. Service providers were also unable to get a picture for the entire Tokyo as they work locally. So we decided to conduct a nighttime count by recruiting a large number of volunteers. Since January 2016, we've been carrying out the count biannually. The count has taken place for 20 nights and has covered 16 wards and 7 cities in Tokyo. On the night of the count, participants divide into groups and walk all streets of a designated area for a couple of hours. When finished, they come back to the headquarters and submit the result. We also ask participants to do a small workshop while waiting for the first train in the morning. Last summer, we had guest participants from Seattle, and you can see Jeff on the right bottom. So through this project, we got an estimate of 2,060 people sleeping roughly in entire Tokyo, which is 2.8 times of the official figure. It means more than 1,000 people on the streets are ignored in the official daytime count. And this project is also about organizing people for change. So far, 1,021 individuals have participated and learned the existence of homelessness in their own city as a direct experience. We keep communicating with them through newsletters and other events. And then the COVID-19 hit Tokyo just like other cities in the world. Fortunately, we've had a relatively small number of cases, and our city went through a soft lockdown where we were encouraged to stay home, but still able to go outside on our own decision. On the bottom half, you can see the government's response to homelessness during the pandemic. I'm not going through all of them, but my point is that these measures focus on preventing people from losing a house or shelter, and there's no special measure for people already on the streets. And then the situation is similar in the private sector. Homeless service providers work hard to gather funding and provide casework in shelters for those at immediate risk of losing the place to stay. But because their capacity is limited, their work on street homelessness had to shrink. Also, many street support activities rely on volunteers, and service providers had to redesign or stop their activities without volunteers during the pandemic. We had to cancel our participatory street count in March as well. So what we do now, we've decided to conduct nighttime hotspot counts in central Tokyo every week so we can tell any change on the streets. We cover 222 hotspots and check people's access to hand washing materials too. Then finally, in order to explore a new form of participatory approach, we just had an online meeting with our street count participants last Sunday. 48 people gathered to share their stories with homeless people and discuss how we could continue participatory street counts. We keep trying to organize residents of Tokyo and come up with new ideas to bring change to our city. That's it, thank you.
Thank you, Now, and Zoe Shen. Now we will have our last speaker, Margot Yoshihira, to share with her experiences working with homeless community in Tokyo. Margot is from UE Associates. Now, Margot, you may now share your slides. Please unmute, Margot.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to this webinar. And it's my pleasure to join this panel. And I'm showing you the PowerPoint slides. So I have been working on community development activities in Sanya for close to 20 years now. And perhaps for many of you, this may be the first time to hear the place name Sanya. Sanya has been known as the day laborers community and still known as the Port District of Tokyo. And as you can see in the photo, there's a flag sign hanging on the church saying, Sanya is a day laborers community. We are against redevelopment which excludes laborers. There used to be more than 80 people sleeping on this shopping street, making this arcade as their big shelter about 50 years ago. Now this arcade is gone and there are around 15 people sleeping. And established in 2010, UE Associates is a social enterprise which runs hostel-like hotels and a cafe in Sanya. And we are commissioned to run 2 hotels for travelers, Megetsu and Geo. And then we rented the building, get a loan from a bank, and renovate Ariake to accommodate homeless people in more comfortable environment. And in 2018, we opened Sanya Cafe on the first floor of the Geo Hotel. I am at the Sanya Cafe now, and to promote diversity and social inclusion in Sanya. There were many foreign travelers as well before COVID-19 outbreak. And our goal is to reappropriation, okay, here. So our goal is reappropriation of Sanya so that people become proud of the place. So under COVID-19, also in Japan, people have lost their jobs and many became homeless. As we have seen, during the crisis, your associates accepted chronically homeless individuals in Sanya in a hotel for tourists in May, just for 7 days during the emergency declaration. Actually, we were asked to accommodate them by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and at first we thought it would continue. However, it was a temporary treatment only for 7 days, and people went back to streets. So we are worried about them, and that is part of the reason why we started the food distribution to homeless people, and and so these activities are done with the Sanya Cafe cleanup team. And so we visit them directly and conduct short interviews each time. So, and if I have time, I will mention about the cleanup team later on. And we keep accepting people who newly become homeless due to COVID-19 and helping them to find a job. And Tokyo Metropolitan Government will stop renting business hotels to accommodate those people, especially those who used to reside in internet cafe. And so maybe we need to keep accepting people more in the vacant hotels, because it used to be for the hotels for travelers. And so what if the second wave comes to Sanya? Yeah, those chronically homeless people keep living on street and refuse to receive social benefit. One of the major reasons for them to refuse is they do not like to stay at the facilities they were put into by a caseworker. Usually their bank beds. The bank beds are provided, or one room has to be shared with another person. There's a thin wooden board set between them. And so it's not a good environment. So we plan to renovate a wooden structural building to accommodate the homeless people on street. And I hope I will have time to explain this later on as well. And the UE associates also face a big challenge during this time. Those 2 hotels are for travelers, and by April, almost all the guests were gone. And the owner told us to stop operating one of the hotels. And so we closed Meigetsu, and by that time, Ariake was full with the because we are accommodating the homeless people. And we needed more support for the two people who are about to be in palliative care. They were suffering from cancer. So we asked the staff in Megetsu to work more in area care to get over the situation. And okay, and besides, we kept Sanya Cafe open during the crisis because it was serving for not only for the travelers, but also for the local residents, including former laborers who stay at hostels where they can cook their meals. Also, we heard them complaining it was so harsh to stay inside their small rooms for self-quarantine, and it could worsen their health. And as for the homeless people living at Tamahime Park, they make a living by collecting cans. You can see the cans in the photo. And due to COVID-19, Japanese people cook and eat at home and use takeaway services such as Uber Eats, and they do not go out to drink. So there are a lot of cans to collect. However, the price of can went down. And so the 1 kilogram of cans has fallen by almost 50% from 18 yen, 85 yen to less than 45 yen. So they are implied. And as for food distribution, we say gohan kubari. And so we walk to them at night and bring them food directly at Tamahime Park and Iroha Shopping Street and around. We always ask like, which would you like, a beef rice bowl or a chicken and egg rice bowl? And then they go like, last time I ate beef, so this time maybe chicken and egg rice bowl. And that brings up a nice conversation. And we make short interviews about what difficulties they're facing with. And they also chat and laugh at jokes in spite of the difficult situation. I think Zoom is really a good tool for us to gather here and internationally, but face-to-face conversation is the best to feel empathy. So, and there's an article issued by Nikkei newspaper. They wrote about our voluntary activity. And these photos show how people use open spaces in Sanya. And people gather at Tamahime Park to play Japanese chess, and there are people who drink on street. And oftentimes they throw away trash on street, and it's getting a sensitive issue in Sanya actually. And luckily enough, we haven't seen the spread of coronavirus in Sanya. And I just heard of a few cases, and that's all. Maybe they use open space in such a way, so perhaps it's a good habit for ventilation to go against coronavirus. I don't know. Anyways, and oh, sorry. Maybe I skipped this slide. And for the next project, we are trying to renovate a wooden structure building to accommodate homeless people. It's only like the 5 rooms, but hopefully we can give them the good environment, and hopefully we will be successful in this project. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Margot. I know you need more time to talk about all the really impressive initiatives, and we will try to do that in the discussion session and Q&A session. Okay. And now let me welcome our discussant, Geoffrey Howe, Professor of Landscape Architecture and Director of Urban Common Labs at University of Washington. who is also the person who brought together this webinar series or yesterday and today. Welcome, Jeff. Please share with us your observation after hearing this short presentation from the region.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to Sume for moderating and allowing me to step back and enjoy the presentations. And it's also great to join the webinar on my last day of quarantine in Taipei, speaking to you from my quarantine room. So again, on the second day, we have seen a very impressive range of examples in terms of how like civil society organizations kind of self-organize to deal with kind of pressing issues on the COVID-19. I'd like to share 4 observations, and so I'll go through these one by one, and perhaps this will lead to some discussion later on. So I think the first thing I think for me is very obvious. I can't help but to notice the different realities for different populations on the COVID-19. And the 3 cities that we have highlighted today, so Hong Kong, Taipei, and Tokyo, are actually relatively successful in terms of containing the outbreak of COVID-19, but that somehow comes at a high price or sacrifice for the marginalized population, the people who are on the streets, the migrant workers, and so forth. The small things, like closures of internet cafe, or like the decrease in price of aluminum can that we just heard about from Margot. Things that may seem like trivial to the general public has a great impact on people who rely on those kind of resources. And so the contrast in terms of the reality is kind of very revealing, and in terms of the challenges that face those populations. And then the different kind of reality also applies to the way governments and civil society approach these challenges, and whether it is whether it's Hong Kong, Taipei, or Tokyo, there is like the immediate reaction from the government is always to kind of shut down things right away, and simply expecting individual to kind of cope on their own. And one example that Sume did not mention is the recent challenge facing the migrant workers at the Taipei main station. At one point, the station authority was going to make the ban on large public gathering permanent in the station lobby. And that has a huge impact on the ability for people to gather, especially migrant workers who have their only day off on Sundays. And this is one of the few places that they can gather for free and freely in a central location in Taipei. And so the contrast of response between the government and the civil society is, I think, something that need to be examined in closer detail. So that's the first thing. The second thing is related, is the sense of this kind of structural inequality in a society. And the challenges during COVID-19 is not just a momentary episode, especially for the marginalized population. Rather, they are long-standing and systemic challenges that they existed before COVID-19 and will likely after as well. And so I think the question is that once and if COVID-19 goes away at some point, how can we address that issue are still there? So the issues of homelessness, the kind of structural inequality in the society, what sort of action and mechanisms are needed to address those long-term challenges is something that I think we need to look at more closely. The third observation that I have, or maybe it's a question as well, is had to do with kind of how how organizations adapt when kind of new crises occur. And I think in all the cases that we have listened to today, it's great that all of them, I think, have all built on some sort of pre-existing network or kind of organizational kind of capacity. So, in the case of migrant workers in Hong Kong, the workers' union play a very important role. And, in Taipei's case, there's kind of pre-existing network of community organizations that kind of are able to kind of step in. In Tokyo, you have Arch and Tokyo Street Count, the network that had existed before, and then the over 20 years of work in the Sanya neighborhood. So it's great that these organizations existed already and are able to adapt when moments of crisis occur. And so I think the question is, how the ability and the capacity for organization to kind of make kind of very quick shift when things happen. And but also at the same time is that oftentimes there are limitations to the way that the organization can adapt, and how long can such kind of adaptation sustain for the long term. I think is something that we need to kind of examine more closely. The question of fatigue that we talked about yesterday, how does that come into play with some of the existing efforts in Hong Kong, Taipei, or Tokyo, or elsewhere? It's something that we need to look at. The last thing I want to bring your attention to is this question about public space and visibility. And so I think in the case that we have looked at today, in Hong Kong and Taipei, for example, the Sunday gatherings of migrant workers play a very important role in sort of planting a sense of public awareness and consciousness about the existence of migrant workers in the societies and the important role that they play. And the services that they need for their daily life and how that play out in public space. And even in Tokyo, the examples of Tokyo street counts, you need access to public space in order to count people who are sleeping on the streets, for example. So public space, I think in the case that we have looked at today, play a very important role in instilling a kind of sense of consciousness and awareness among the public towards the conditions that the marginalized populations face in the society. And so under COVID-19, when public space is no longer accessible, or the degree of accessibility has become greatly limited or reduced, how does that impact the consciousness of the general public towards the issues faced by the marginalized population? I think is one that need also greater examination. Does this kind of out of sight, out of mind, condition add to the disparity that is already there, and the structure of kind of inequality that's already there in the society? And how can we overcome that limitation is something that is worth looking at as well. So I hope that give you enough to think about, and I hope that we can come back to some of these questions later on in the discussion session, also in the Q&A. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. So I think now I would invite all the panelists to join the conversation following the full observation that Jeff shared. And I think there's a lot of resonance can be made. And like, for example, when Jeff talks about the issue of sustainability. When we've been seeing a lot of organizations, is it working upon existing social infrastructure to be able to adapt and step in, launch new initiatives? But how long can we do this? And I think first of all, I would like to send this question to Margot, because you talk about the closure of hotels, which generates important income to support the organization's work. And so, so I guess you may have something more to share about these issues of sustainability.
Sustainability. We are doing this as a business as well. We are a social enterprise. So actually, we are just thinking of receiving a loan from a bank to sustain our activities and to have the budget for the new project. So, so maybe a little bit different situation with the voluntary organizations.
Is there any like specific loan that was designed to respond to this crisis?
Yeah, actually there is. So we have to take advantage of this situation as well. So the bank give us a loan easier. I think it's much easier than the normal time. And and we have to and we have to feed our staff to they need salary. And yeah, and so also we ask for donations as well, but we are business based, so we don't usually ask for donation. Our voice is maybe too small to call for donation, and I think we need to utilize SNS, social network, and to ask for donations more, but to help those homeless people.
Okay, I guess Michelle from Impact Hong Kong, you may also want to respond to this issue in terms of how do you adapt, but how for how long can you do this?
Thank you, Jeff, for the observation just now, because when you talk about the public space kind of thing, in Hong Kong we have a restriction of public gathering, and it really it really affects our food distribution program in Hong Kong to help the community to get access to food and the basic survival. And right before the webinar, I just mentioned briefly, because we kind of need to close out one of our center today, because we one of the residents in the building were affected by COVID-19. That's why we need to close the whole center, and we have no place to serve food except we are serving food in the park next to our center. So we're kind of using like a flash mob kind of way to adjust or adopt this kind of situation under the COVID-19. Yeah, I think most of the organization they have their own solution to answer the question, to answer the challenges of the inequality. It's just that how we can examine our solution and make it impactful way to really address the question. As an organizer, I always go back to solidarity as a solution, because I think when we have the capacity, we test the solution, and then we find out the limitation, maybe about the resources, and then this COVID-19 kind of challenges really make our organization thinking how we can form a network of homeless in Hong Kong in order to address the problem effectively, and then also lobbying the government. At the end of the day, the government is the resourceful, powerful kind of machine that they can do much more than a small organization like us.
Thank you, Michelle. Well, in terms of we need to have a coordination between the governments and organizations, and we can't rely on small organizations to fix the structural problems. I wonder if the reasons are okay. So yeah, if the reasons are in order to respond to the efficiency.
Yeah, we're having some audio difficulty. Suma, you want to try again? Then let's see where one of us need to step in. Can you try again, your audio? Okay, we cannot hear you. All right, let's keep the conversation going, and it was also at the 11 o'clock mark, so maybe we can transition into the Q&A. So Liz, do you want to take it over and share with us some of the questions that the audience has raised?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Liz, and it's really my pleasure to be part of this great discussion today. So thank you to all of the participants, and also thank you to all of the people who raised really interesting questions. I don't know if we can get to all of them, but let's just jump into the questions and see what kind of active discussion we can keep going. So first, I'd like to bring some questions that were asked directly to Michelle about Impact Hong Kong. So the first one is, how do you all manage, this is from SJO, how do you all manage to find spaces in Hong Kong to house the homeless? What cost of housing and space is an issue? Big questions. How many people can be housed in the spaces that you have helped? And will there be conflicts within the same space? And how do you manage conflicts for people staying in the same space? And actually, there's one more question directly to Michelle, so I want to go ahead and combine them, if that's okay. Another question from Tessa Maria is, do the homeless move around? Do their stations change from day to day? I notice a lot of suitcases with them in the Mac refugee photo. And also, it would be interesting to know how responsible giving is understood. How does this shape plans for giving of charity and aid?
Wow. Lots of questions.
So you don't need to answer all of them, but maybe you can kind of
just some of us. During the COVID-19, we hosted around 200 people, but we actually just able to find some guest house partner to provide rooms for them. Yeah, we also have a lot of limitation on this aspect, because we, as a small charity, we don't really own any property. We can only partner with the guest house, which makes me sad, because it's, I think, kind of our organization purpose is to provide community, but during the COVID, we can only give them, like, send them to one room and lock them up, and then they got no place to go. So yeah, this kind of make me like wonder what we can do further on this aspect. That's why I'm really interested in what Margot has mentioned in her last slide about the share house, because that is something we are trying to build right now. We are trying to let the homeless stay together in order for them to support each other out. So I think I'm going to email Margot for more information about this. the second point about the homeless, people, even before COVID-19, they stay in tunnels, they stay on the streets, or they stay in McDonald's or night cafe. They move around quite often, and the problem, the reason why they need to move, one thing is because the government somehow they would remove their stuff on tunnel or park frequently, like few months. One time they remove the thing so that they can, to scare people away, ask them to go, and they need to find some other place to stay. That make our job difficult because we can't really locate the homeless, and we can't really like build up the friendship and then do the help further.
Great, thank you. Before we move to the next question, Shumei, can you say hello to us again? Okay, we can't hear you still. You're still muted.
About this? Can you hear
Yes, that sounds great. So let's take advantage. I want to take advantage of this to move to the next question that includes, it's really for our friends from Hong Kong and also Shumei from Taiwan and maybe others as well. But related to, we got several questions related to space. The first one is from Franklin, which was, were the public open spaces, and this is especially for Hong Kong and Taiwan, were the public open spaces temporarily closed during the height of the pandemic? If so, how did the communities, for example, the domestic workers in Hong Kong and Taiwan, react to it? And I would also like to combine this question to another question about spaces from Mayumi. To the speakers, do you notice homeless people using newly spaces in some parks? How does the government deal with that? How do you feel to make the spaces useful for the lower income people? So maybe Shumei, why don't, if you're okay, Shumei, why don't you start first about if you have any comments about open spaces in Taiwan?
Yes, we did experience that for a while in March and maybe 2 weeks in April. And it affected a lot, especially to those who cannot navigate social media. However, social workers, community workers have tried hard and did a great job. They try to pay visit to the marginalized communities wherever they are, or they a lot of people in Taiwan are using Line, so they formed Line social groups and try to sustain the sense of community through social media or phone calls. While some of the communities managed to adapt to this new norm during crisis, still people, for example, people with dementia are especially having difficulty adjusting to new reality, and we've learned a lot from these problems, not how their situation degraded due to the crisis. Yeah, I guess that's what I can share from Taipei for the moment.
Great, thank you. For our friends from Hong Kong, do you have any comments about the changes in the use of open spaces? Cecilia or Marta or Michelle? Anybody who wants to talk?
You probably have heard that in Hong Kong there was a ban on public gathering. It's a little bit complicated because the pandemic kind of coincided a little bit with the protests. You know, they all heard about it. So yes, I mean, there were bans. I think in the beginning it was restricting public gatherings to no more than 4 people. And so that, of course, directly affected the domestic workers who tended to gather around in public spaces with larger groups on Sundays. They did adapt to that, and I think from my knowledge, maybe Marta know a little bit more about it with more observations. The police have not been too strict on monitoring the domestic workers gathering, but rather, the attention has been paid to more about the protests. But I think, Marta, also during this time, you have been doing a studio, a design studio that looked into the public spaces of domestic workers, although the students are not able to actually go out to the street to observe, but you did some desktop research. So maybe you can share with us a little bit on your observations on public space and migrant workers.
Yeah, I think what we notice is that, and this is, COVID has accelerated it, but it's a trend that has been happening in the last few years. So the two traditional gathering spots for domestic workers in Hong Kong, which are Central and Causeway Bay, Victoria Park, have been starting to spread across the territory. So when employers under the pandemic were scared that the domestic workers were taking their days off or maybe going too far away, what we saw was that these spots throughout the territory started to be more successful, right? So smaller groups of domestic workers, instead of gathering in these two large locations, started to be spread across the territory. So I think that that's also a difference in the way that public space is being used. So smaller groups in more or many more locations.
I just want to add a point there. This kind of development is not entirely new. It's just, I think the pandemic kind of helped to accelerate that, because in the recent years, there are more services developed in different neighborhoods. So domestic workers have already been doing different things on Sunday, going to different places to conduct their activities, rather than just focusing on just Central and Victoria Park. This is something also quite interesting because it's facilitated by social media. When social media, they post different kinds of activities and gatherings and events in different places in Hong Kong. So on Sunday, domestic workers now tend to move from place to place. They do not spend the whole day in one place, in one public space, but rather to kind of participate in different events and activities. That's an interesting and maybe even positive development with this better communication and networks.
Great, thank you. Michelle, did you want to add anything about the issue, the situation of changes of use of space in Hong Kong?
Yeah, when we send out the food in the park to the homeless, we actually get some warning from police because of the restriction of public gathering. And I know that some of our homeless friends, they get the tickets, they get the warning and also get the tickets from the police. It's not because they gather, but they are using the police using the ban of public gathering to scare them off from the park. I think like kind of they make use of the COVID to get what they want right now, because for the protests and also for the homeless, they don't want them. They don't want to see. Yeah, and for as an organization, just as I mentioned, we kind of using like flash mob kind of way to send out food. I think this kind of our way to respond to the public space kind of problem. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I want to keep the idea of space in mind, but I want to move to our friends from Japan and Tokyo and ask you maybe one question each in a row. So first, I want to ask a question that was submitted by Heidi for Nao and Masato. Sorry. It's a question for Mago about Sanya first. Do you know about similar initiatives in Tokyo, Osaka, or other large cities in Japan? It feels like Corona has speeded up social problems, especially for people like in your projects. And if you wanted to follow up on the change of the use of space in Tokyo, that would also be welcome.
Maybe sorry, I didn't get the question well.
Okay, let me say again. So you're doing something very unique in Sanya. Do you know, is somebody else doing something else like you in Tokyo or Osaka? And also, is Corona is making the problems bigger? Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, there are also the organizations who try to have the accommodations for homeless people, but actually in Japan the problem is the poverty business. They are very big, and they just put people into the shelter. That's all. They don't really talk to people, and they just giving directions, and just yeah. So from top to bottom way. So that makes the dignity of people lower, and they lose their self-esteem. So, and it end up like people try to escape from the shelter and living on street. That is their choice, on living on street. How horrible is that? And so that's why I want to show alternative way to accommodate homeless people with a better environment and with good social, psychosocial environment.
Great,
And,
thank you very much. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And maybe for Sanya, things are not changing. I don't see so much change in Sanya, but of course, new homeless people are coming in. So we see the increase of homeless people, and in Sanya there are many hotels like the ones we have. So that's why the homeless people so who used to especially stay in internet cafe and so on, they now stay at the business hotel provided by metropolitan government, but they are going to close. The government stopped renting the place. So we'll see the more homeless people coming in Sanya, I guess.
Great, thank you very much. I think I would also like to focus a question and ask now, and especially maybe Masato, who we see now the face for the first time, so working together with ARC. So maybe we can ask the next question directly to Masato. And we did receive a question about the details about how you're doing the count. So when you're doing the count, the question is from Lisa for ARC, when you're doing counting homeless people, do you also count the drunk people, regular salarymen maybe, who missed the last train? And how does the biennial count avoid huge holidays like Christmas and New Year? So maybe you could explain a little bit more about the strategy, about how you do the count and how that's developed over time.
Okay, thank you, Liz. And yeah, about drunk people who missed the last train, we can tell. So we don't count the people who missed the train. And about the Christmas or the celebration days, we avoid the Friday night or the night before that day celebration days. Its situation is changed, so it will be changed. So generally weekday nights we carry out, or maybe Sunday night, yeah. So, but actually the count is, we became to know about during this COVID-19 period, the count has a double meaning. We count the head of homeless people actually to evidence, to make evidence. But at the same time, we count the homeless people in our society, as citizens. So I drove 6 nights in this 1 month, 6 times in the midnight in Tokyo. And first in May, there were no people on the street except homeless people and policemen. And nowadays, it's general, it's ordinary nights. There are many people on the street, even midnight in Tokyo. But I suddenly know, I cannot count the people. I can count the people on several points, 220 points like that, but actually more than maybe 600-700 points we have found through the street count with citizen volunteers, like 100 or 200 people one night. That amount of citizens can count the homeless people in Tokyo, the numbers, and also we 100 citizens count the homeless people in as citizens. So I cannot count by myself or by just 2-3 people group, small group. We can literally count the small part of the city and small part of population, and we cannot count. We cannot meet the people without many citizens, except we. So I think Tokyo Street can't make a we. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think we are not going to be able to get to all of the questions today, but I want to bring maybe one final main point up, and this kind of ties in with some of the comments that Jeff was sharing with us, which is related to institutional support and changing in the society system and how we interact with the government and other actors. And I think we had several questions who dealt with this issue. So I want to just read the 3 questions first and then ask some speakers to reply however they like. So the first question was from Michelle, who wrote, curious about the funding landscape in your respective countries to help out this work. Would like to hear how it differs from the funding context in the US, which is what I'm more familiar with: government funding, private foundations, individual donations, nonprofit grants, etc. So who's funding these activities? The role of the government, the role of the nonprofit, the role of the private funders. So the question is about funding. And then another question is from Seed, which was, addressing homelessness also depends on political will. How have the social organization groups engaged with political representation? So the government or politics, or so we have funding and politics and the government. And then the third question is, for all the speakers, do you envision the chance that institutions in these 3 cities will support and recognize the important role of migrant workers' space occupation in these cities? And I think that can be expanded to homeless people as well. So related to the institutional questions, how are we interacting with the funding sources, or how are we interacting with the government resources on the connecting with our organizations, and how could these institutions might change or improve? So I don't know who would be interested in answering that, any of those aspects first. I asked too big of a question.
Maybe I could,
yeah.
I could just start with something maybe a little bit larger from, as I explained that Marta and I have been doing these larger projects about self-help practices of migrant workers. We have 2 observations there. The first is that a lot of the institutions that are associated with the migrant workers, not from the Hong Kong side, but from the consulate and from the banks, like Indonesian banks, Filipino banks, and philanthropic institutions, they have been quite active in supporting some of these self-help practices by contributing money and some resources to them, but also emphasizing self-help, that migrants have to help themselves. So we were quite impressed with their engagement with these, but at the same time also aware of their specific purposes, such as the banks, that they would like to develop future patrons, right, in the future, for the migrants to borrow money from them and to engage when they go back to the home countries. These will become their clients. So that's the kind of, they give different supports to them. So this is something, it also suggests that the self-help is not really entirely just independent, but there's a kind of intricate relationship between the institutional engagement in calling for supporting, claiming that self-help is really important for migrants. The second observation is about, I think this relates to Jeff's earlier comments about the idea of equity. And also I think Shumei mentioned, I saw in the Taiwan's case, the approach, the attitudes towards migrant workers. There's still quite a lot of discrimination against disadvantaged. So all these self-help practices, when we presented them, it seems really kind of very, very positive and enlightening. But in Hong Kong, it's been really not seen as part of the civic kind of this sort of civic engagement in the eyes of most of the local residents. We were surprised, and maybe not surprised, that, as you know, Hong Kong in the last half year or so, we're talking about all kinds of civic urbanisms and kind of civil society engagement with the protests and with this sort of calling for activisms and all that. But the activities of the migrants have not been seen, have very few occasions have been seen locally as part of this larger movements. It's not, the same movement, of course, but there's a very vibrant local activist practices among the migrant workers fighting for their own rights, right? With the unions and all of that. But there are continue to be seen as something that is divorced from this sort of larger development of activisms within Hong Kong, amongst the local people. So that gap is quite telling. In a sense, it also suggests a very long existing divide that has not really been bridged that much yet, even with the COVID pandemic, with these sort of activist practices among the migrant workers. It suggests this entrenched divide between the host and the guest societies, right? That for a society that is long still rely on migrant workers, it's almost something taken for granted. And so in a way, also these migrant workers, their self-help practices are also survival strategies. I think that's a comment from yesterday that we found really useful, that we have to remind ourselves that it's not just about something enlightening that is that very we find it very positive, but there are also survival strategies for a low-income external migrant group that have no chance of becoming citizens in this city. So their motivations and their aspirations are also shaped by these marginalized positions that so far has not been really bridged that much with the pandemic. So,
thank you so much. I'm sorry to cut, I don't want to cut you off, and I wish we could just continue this conversation. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we're actually already out and I'm already over. So I want to turn the moderating back to Shumei. So thank you very much.
I have to unmute myself. Before I wrap up, I want to respond to the question about institutional support, which is indeed critical to the case of the online community bazaar that I talked about in my presentation. It happens that Taipei City government launched a program called Digital Content Incubator, and it happens to be located in Wanhua. Before the crisis, everybody loved at that program, ridiculed at the program. However, it became quite useful to facilitate this relocation of the market online, which I didn't talk about much during my short-time presentation. And in responding to Cecilia in terms of migrant worker, I want to again use the case of I think we've been established more our understanding of migrant workers on domestic helpers across borders, but we know rather little about factory workers or fishermen, migrant fishermen, who really can't make it to public space over the weekend because they don't have a weekend. And I think we do need to learn more about the complexity, the complex picture of these marginalized communities across borders. Sorry for exploiting the privilege of being the moderator. I wish we have more time. Thank you all to the speakers and those behind the scene facilitating the webinars. And thank you for those who attended, asking questions. Sorry we can't address them all, but we will try to assume there will be video recording online, and I believe through that the conversation can continue. The webinar was organized by April, SCL Hub, and the Pacific Rim Community Design Network. Participating organizations including University of Hong Kong, ARCH from Tokyo, University of Tokyo, Tokyo Institute of Technology, Impact Hong Kong, UE Associates, University of Washington, National Taiwan University, and Tohoku University. So there will be recording and slides will be shared via email on the website. Please share the webinar info and tag at April 1997 or hashtag April Plus on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and see you soon.